Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a land where the golden sun rises over flat horizons, where dusty palms sway beside calm, reed-edged waters, and where your feet crunch across hot limestone temple floors. You stand before a market stall woven from rushes, its shelves lined with something surprising giant, curved fragments of creamy eggshell. These are ostrich eggs, gleaming in the early light, and tonight you're going to discover why the ancient Egyptians believed these eggs held sacred, almost magical powers. You probably won't survive this if you're planning to outrun an ostrich yourself. By the way, they can sprint faster than a racehorse and kick hard enough to crack a lion's skull. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk among temple reliefs showing proud men holding large eggs aloft like trophies. Historians still argue whether these scenes depict direct hunting rituals or symbolic rebirth ceremonies. Mainstream scholars agree, though, that ostrich eggs were prized in Egypt not only as food but as vessels for perfumes, cosmetics, and ritual offerings. They believed the egg's creamy shell embodied life's potential. After all, crack it open, and new life emerges. But here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some archaeologists suggest eggs were placed in tombs partly because they were too tough to bother cooking, so it was easier to turn them into containers than breakfast. Imagine your fingertips grazing those smooth, chalky shells. Vendors dip them in river water to wash away dust, revealing subtle ivory and caramel speckles. Beside you, a priest murmurs blessings over an uncracked egg, lifting it towards the morning sun in offering to Hathor, goddess of beauty and scent. The desert air is dry but scented faintly of myrrh drifting from nearby altars, mingling with the smell of ostrich feathers sold in bundles for fans and headdresses. You rise before dawn, slipping your feet into worn leather sandals, the air still cool with the final sighs of night. Today, you join a small hunting party heading out across the scrubby desert fringe. Their target isn't meat, not this time, but eggs. The men carry curved staffs and leather slings, their bodies draped in linen wraps. A faint breeze lifts grains of sand against your ankles as you walk, and you watch the eastern sky turn pale gold, then peach, then the deep pink of a pomegranate's heart. Historians still argue whether ostrich egg gathering was primarily a daily food task or tied to temple tribute. What they do agree on is that it required stealth. Ostriches may look goofy with their bobbing necks and cartoonishly huge eyes, but they're vigilant. If startled, they'll bolt at over 70 kilometers per hour. Here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient hunters believed that if an ostrich saw you approaching its nest, it could hypnotize you with its stare until you froze. Probably just a story told by uncles to spook sleepy apprentices like you at dawn. You crouch low behind a dusty acacia bush, watching a female ostrich settle her feathery bulk over a shallow scrape in the sand. Nearby, pale eggs cluster like giant marbles in a pit no deeper than your hand. The hunters wait for her to wander off in search of thornbush berries. The silence stretches, broken only by the distant hoot of a desert owl returning to its hollow for the day. Finally, she rises and stalks away with deliberate dignity. The men pad forward, feet silent on sand, lifting each heavy egg with both hands. You feel its surprising warmth against your skin, the shell faintly dimpled with pores. It weighs almost as much as a newborn baby. One by one, they slip the eggs into woven reed baskets, padded with wool to avoid cracks on the journey back. The sun rises higher, glinting off bronze amulets and the egg's creamy sheen. You turn homeward with the group, cradling this treasure that soon will become perfume, sacred offering, and the secret to a noblewoman's sweetly scented hair. The baskets arrive back at the village just as the sun climbs overhead, sharpening every shadow to jet black against the sand. You follow the hunters through narrow lanes lined with mud brick houses. Chickens scatter underfoot, and the smell of baking emmer bread drifts from tiny courtyards where women knead dough on clay boards. Your arms ache slightly from carrying the egg, its weight a quiet reminder of its worth. In a shaded workshop near the temple, artisans gather to begin their delicate task, cracking the shells. Historians still argue whether eggs were cracked immediately after collection or stored for weeks to ferment slightly before use in perfumes and paints. Mainstream records suggest immediate use was common to avoid spoilage of any remaining albumin inside. The artisan before you picks up a thick bronze awl and taps the egg gently, turning it with careful wrist flicks. The sound is crisp, like knocking on polished wood. Here's a quirky tidbit for your sleepy mind. Fragments of cracked ostrich eggshells have been found in graves as far south as Nubia and as far east as the Persian Gulf, sometimes inlaid with gold leaf to mimic mother of pearl. Slowly, a crack zigzags down the curve. The artisan smiles softly and taps again until a triangular wedge loosens. She removes it, revealing the empty cavity lined with a faint yellow membrane. You lean closer and inhale the faint, musty scent of old yolk and sun-baked chalk. The remaining shell is now a vessel, its natural curve perfect for scooping powders or storing thick pastes. Nearby, another artisan uses a stone blade to cut smaller pieces from cracked shells, shaping them into scoops and cosmetic spatulas. The table before her is littered with eggshell shards gleaming in the angled morning light. One man tests the fragment's edge by scraping it along a rough sandstone block. Satisfied with its smoothness, he sets it aside to await the perfume makers who will soon arrive carrying bundles of myrrh resin, lotus petals, and thick oils that shimmer golden in clay jars. You brush flecks of eggshell dust from your fingers, feeling the cool grit cling to your skin like moonlit sand. The sun now blazes high, painting the courtyard stones with wavering mirages of heat. You watch as the artisans begin the next careful stage, washing and drying the cracked shells. The fragments sit in woven baskets, pale and dappled like half-formed moons. Nearby, a young boy carries a clay jar of river water, its cool dampness dripping down his forearm as he pours a gentle stream over the shells. They clink softly against each other, the sound like tiny temple bells ringing in the morning hush. Historians still argue whether these cleaning rituals were purely hygienic or carried purification prayers to cleanse the egg's spiritual essence before perfume mixing. Mainstream Egyptologists agree that shells used for sacred or cosmetic purposes had to be spotless to prevent contamination. Here's a quirky tidbit. Ostrich eggshell is naturally antibacterial due to its porous structure, so even lightly rinsed pieces could store pastes or oils for long periods without spoiling. You kneel beside an older woman who scrubs each fragment with a bundle of river reeds tied with flax cord. She hums under her breath, a slow, repetitive song praising Hathor's fragrant blessings. Under her brisk strokes, the shells lose their dusty yellow tinge and reveal an almost porcelain-like creaminess. Tiny grooves catch glints of the sun, and droplets roll off to form shallow puddles in the sand. After washing, the pieces are laid out on wide reed mats. The courtyard smells of warm eggshell, river silt, and the distant sweetness of date palm syrup being boiled nearby. You sit cross-legged in the shade, fanning yourself lazily as flies drone in the heavy air. The woman gestures at you to help, so you lift a freshly cleaned shard, feeling its thin, chalky surface rough against your fingertips. Carefully, you set it down beside the others, watching as a warm breeze curls across the mat, drying the shells to a faint dusty whiteness. The work is slow and silent, except for the rhythmic scratching of reeds against shell and the occasional distant bray of a donkey cart trundling past. The sun climbs higher still, turning the courtyard into a gleaming kiln as the eggshell fragments dry into perfect, ready canvases for perfume alchemy. The air now quivers with heat. Cicadas rasp from thorn bushes beyond the village walls as you move indoors to where the next transformation awaits. In a small, darkened workshop, lined with shelves of clay jars and bronze tools, the dried eggshell fragments are ready to become fine, chalky powder. You kneel on the cool, packed earth floor beside an elderly man with ink-blackened fingernails. Before him sits a shallow basalt grinding bowl, its rim worn smooth by decades of work. Historians still argue whether eggshell powders were primarily cosmetic pigments, medical bases, or essential perfume thickeners. Mainstream evidence shows they were used in all three. Their calcium-rich grit ideal for absorbing fragrant oils and forming long-lasting scented pastes. Here's a quirky tidbit for your dreamy mind. Greek physicians later prescribed ostrich eggshell powder mixed with honey as a cure for bad breath, though your dentist would probably disagree. The old man places a shell shard into the mortar. With deliberate, circling motions, he crushes it under a rounded granite pestle. Crunch, scrape, circle, breathe. The sound is oddly soothing, like distant surf on pebbles. You watch white dust bloom around the pestle's edges, settling in soft dunes across the stone bowl. The man pauses to rub a pinch between his fingertips, nodding at its fineness. You lean in to sniff the pale powder. It smells faintly of heated chalk and river mud, a scent strangely grounding in this dense summer air. Beside him, an apprentice gathers the powder with a thin bronze spatula, transferring it into a wide clay bowl. Light from the narrow window glows across its surface, revealing delicate flecks that sparkle like crushed seashells. The apprentice smiles at you with powdered cheeks, making him look half like a mischievous spirit, half like a child caught raiding flower jars. Soon, the room fills with shallow bowls of eggshell dust, each awaiting its destiny in oils, resins, and blooming lotus perfumes. You brush stray grains from your knees and stand slowly, your back aching pleasantly from the simple, repetitive labor that has linked human hands to nature's treasures since time beyond memory. You stretch your arms and walk across the dim workshop to where perfume makers are gathering, their linen robes faintly stained with fragrant oils. Each carries a bundle of tools wrapped in reed mats. Bronze pestles, tiny spoons carved from hippo ivory, and slim reed brushes. They unwrap these carefully, laying them out with the quiet reverence of priests preparing for ritual. Before them sit wide clay bowls filled with the freshly ground ostrich eggshell powder you helped prepare. Historians still argue whether perfume making was strictly temple licensed or also a lucrative domestic craft for noble households. Mainstream records show both existed side by side, often employing the same techniques. Here's a quirky tidbit. Egyptians believed sweet scents fed the Ka, the spiritual life force, which explains why even low-ranking officials spent beyond their means to smell pleasant for the gods. You watch as a master perfumer pours thick, greenish castor oil into a bowl, its surface shimmering with gold reflections in the flickering lamplight. He adds a spoonful of eggshell powder and begins stirring slowly, scraping the sides so nothing clings unused. The paste thickens into a pale, creamy mass with faint gray specks. He pauses to wipe his hands on a linen rag, leaving smears of oil that darken like wet papyrus. Into this blend, he sprinkles pinches of fragrant resin scraped from pine trees, harvested far to the north along the Mediterranean coast. The resin grains melt slightly, releasing an earthy, sharp scent that tingles your nose. He leans forward and breathes in deeply, eyes half closed in approval. "Good base," he murmurs. "It will hold the lotus oil beautifully." Nearby, a young apprentice mixes powdered myrrh into another eggshell oil paste. Myrrh's spicy, almost medicinal aroma curls into the warm air, mingling with the chalky sweetness of eggshell dust. The workshop begins to smell like an ancient forest carried on desert winds, a scent at once grounding and strangely invigorating. You watch these masters work with silent patience, knowing each bowl will soon become a sacred perfume, used to anoint gods, nobles, and lovers alike. The workshop now hums with quiet focus. Lamps flicker amber light across the perfumers' faces as they lean over their mixtures, adding fragrant ingredients one by one. You stand close enough to feel the heat of the oil lamps on your cheek, breathing in layers of sweetness and spice that swirl in the heavy afternoon air. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians' favorite perfume ingredient was truly blue lotus or imported cinnamon bark. Mainstream consensus holds that both were prized, though blue lotus held deeper religious symbolism linked to rebirth and sun cycles. Here's a quirky tidbit. Blue lotus wasn't technically a true lotus at all. It's closer to a water lily, though no priest would have cared about botanical correctness when chanting to Hathor over a bubbling bowl of perfume paste. A master perfumer reaches for a small linen pouch tied with papyrus cord. He unties it to reveal dried blue lotus petals, crinkled and deep indigo, their scent still faintly honeyed despite months of drying. He crumbles them gently into the eggshell oil blend, using a smooth bronze spoon to fold the bright flecks into the pale, creamy paste. The scent lifts at once, a soft, sleepy sweetness, like warm honey left out under the noon sun. Next, he grinds a thin sliver of imported cinnamon bark on a sandstone rasp, releasing a dry, woody aroma that tingles your nose and makes your mouth water unexpectedly. The fine cinnamon powder joins the lotus in the bowl, and the paste darkens slightly to a soft beige swirl flecked with red and blue fragments. Finally, he adds a drop of myrrh oil, letting it bloom outwards in curling golden streaks. The apprentice beside him sighs, eyes half closing in bliss at the layered scent, floral, spicy, earthy, and rich. You imagine this paste dabbed onto wigs, worked into beards, and pressed into tiny amulets to hang around lovers' necks. In this hot, perfumed air, your eyelids grow heavy, and for a moment you drift, lulled by the rhythmic scrape of bronze spoons and the warmth radiating from flickering lamps. The thick scent of blue lotus, cinnamon, and myrrh clings to your hair as you follow the perfumers into a deeper storage room. Here, the air is cool and dark, lined with tall shelves built from rough acacia planks. On these shelves sit dozens of hollowed ostrich eggshells, each glowing faintly in the lamplight with a soft cream luminescence. You run your fingers across one and feel its thin, delicate smoothness, interrupted by faint natural dimples like a landscape of tiny dunes. Historians still argue whether these ostrich egg containers were sealed purely for preservation or carried spiritual symbolism of life and rebirth. Mainstream scholars note that eggs represented divine containment, a protective vessel holding something precious and powerful. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some temples, priests placed sealed eggshell jars at statue feet as daily offerings, believing the rising scent pleased the gods far more than gold. A perfumer ladles thick, fragrant paste into a wide-mouthed eggshell. It fills slowly, the blue lotus petals swirling into the cinnamon-speckled cream. The paste domes slightly at the opening, and he taps the shell side to settle the mixture evenly. Another apprentice approaches, carrying a small clay pot filled with warm beeswax, its surface gleaming like melted amber under the lamps. Using a thin bronze spoon, she drizzles beeswax around the eggshell's rim, sealing it shut with a carved stopper made from pale sycamore wood. As the wax cools, it forms a golden ring along the join, holding fragrance safely inside. You notice that each shell is marked with a simple hieroglyph scratched into its curve. A lotus for Hathor's temple stores, a falcon for Ra's priests, a seated woman for cosmetic sellers in the markets. These symbols glint under the lamplight like secrets waiting to be whispered. The room smells rich and musky, each eggshell jar an aromatic promise awaiting its journey, whether to a priest's storehouse, a noblewoman's private chambers, or a lover's perfumed gift basket wrapped in linen and reeds. You take one last deep breath, memorizing this mingled scent of sacred sweetness and chalky eggshell that feels as eternal as the desert itself. Later that afternoon, as the sun slants in golden beams through narrow high windows, you step into the temple courtyard to watch how these perfumes enter daily life. The heat radiates from sandstone pillars, warming your calves as you move through drifting incense smoke that smells of frankincense and desert herbs. Ahead, a priest stands on a small dais, his shaved head gleaming with a thin sheen of perfumed oil. Historians still argue whether priests used perfumes mainly for ritual purity or as offerings themselves. Mainstream inscriptions suggest both. Scent purified the priest to approach the gods and simultaneously fed the gods' senses. Here's a quirky tidbit. Temple records from Karnak mention mixing ostrich eggshell perfume with crocodile fat to polish gold altars. So yes, your sweet-scented eggshell paste might have ended up massaged onto statues rather than necks. You watch as the priest dips 2 fingers into a small ostrich eggshell jar filled with blue lotus perfume. He anoints the massive sandstone feet of Hathor's statue, brushing the fragrant oil in slow arcs across the carved toenails. The scent blooms into the hot, shaded air, mingling with lotus garlands draped over the goddess's lap. Nearby, temple attendants re-oil their linen wigs, smoothing the scented pastes along braids to keep them glossy and to mask the desert sweat. Beyond the temple walls, in noble courtyards, women recline under palm leaf awnings, while attendants rub cinnamon lotus eggshell perfume onto their bare shoulders and collarbones. The mixture melts against warm skin, releasing tiny puffs of scent with every movement. One girl laughs softly as her little brother waves his hand in front of her nose, teasing her with, "You smell like goddess feet today." In the markets, young men tuck small fragments of perfumed eggshell into woven reed pouches to carry against their chests, scenting them as they walk through crowds of vendors hawking onions, copper pots, and fresh fish laid out on wet sand. For them, these perfumes are not just luxuries. They are identity, prayer, memory, and the soft promise of being remembered as sweet-smelling even on the hottest, longest days. As dusk approaches, painting the sky in strokes of violet and amber, you wander through the village towards a small shrine nestled beside a flowering acacia tree. The evening air is warm and still, carrying hints of wood smoke, date syrup, and the fading sweetness of blue lotus drifting from temple courtyards. Here, among flickering oil lamps and bowls of offering bread, you watch perfume take on a different, subtler power, one of magic and prayer. Historians still argue whether Egyptian perfumes were believed to contain literal divine essence or simply attract God's favor through their pleasing scent. Mainstream papyri reveal spells instructing believers to blend specific perfumes before love incantations or protective rituals. Here's a quirky tidbit. One old charm suggested anointing yourself with ostrich eggshell lotus paste before confronting enemies, so they would see your words as sweet and your heart as mighty. A young woman kneels at the shrine, her linen dress glowing pale against the shadowed stone. She dips a carved eggshell spatula into a small open jar and scoops out cinnamon blue lotus paste. Her fingers glide it along her wrists, neck, and behind her ears in 3 deliberate strokes. She murmurs softly, calling upon Hathor to grant her beauty, love, and a kind heart in her future husband. The scent rises warmly into the air, mingling with flickering lamplight and the quiet chant of cicadas. Beside her, an elderly scribe applies a thin line of perfumed paste along his brow, while whispering words of protection against scorpions and illness. His jar is capped with beeswax and sealed with red ochre lines, a sign that it carries not just fragrance but divine blessing. You catch his scent as he passes, resinous, smoky, with an edge of chalky eggshell grit. Later, as darkness deepens and stars emerge over the quiet village, priests store their jars of eggshell perfumes in stone niches behind temple doors. Their fragrances remain trapped in those cool shadows, held in silent eggshell vessels until the dawn, ready to feed gods, sweeten human skin, and whisper prayers across the timeless desert wind. The sun rises once more, gilding the rooftops and glowing across the river's slow curves. Today, you join a small caravan preparing to depart from the village's bustling market square. Donkeys bray as traders load them with baskets of copper ingots, rolled linen, and bundles of ostrich feathers tied neatly with papyrus cord. At the center of this trade lies a treasure both fragrant and fragile: ostrich eggshell perfumes bound for lands beyond Egypt's southern border. Historians still argue whether these perfumes were traded more as luxury items or as sacred temple commodities gifted to allied kingdoms. Mainstream trade records show jars of eggshell perfume carried along Red Sea routes towards Nubia and Punt, prized for their dense scent blends and durable eggshell packaging. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Nubian rulers reportedly collected so many perfumed ostrich eggs that their tombs included carved depictions of entire storage chambers lined with them. You watch a trader pack jars tightly into woven palm baskets, padding each with spun wool so the delicate shells won't crack during jolting rides across sand dunes. The scent of cinnamon lotus paste wafts from open jars waiting to be sealed. Nearby, a merchant tests the beeswax seal on one eggshell container, tipping it gently upside down to ensure not a drop leaks out before nodding in satisfaction. The caravan sets off at dawn, donkeys plodding steadily through soft pink sand, their hoofprints vanishing quickly behind them in the desert breeze. As you walk alongside, the baskets sway and clink with the delicate percussion of eggshells, their perfumes mingling with the scents of sweat, dust, and sun-warmed linen. Beyond the eastern horizon lie lands of ebony, wood, leopards, and incense trees. There, these jars will be traded for ivory bangles, rare animal pelts, and obsidian knives. The perfumes will find new homes in royal tents, temple treasuries, and the private chambers of queens who dab scented eggshell paste along their collarbones before slipping into woven grass beds beneath Nubia's moonlit skies. The caravan returns weeks later, dusty and tired but laden with exotic wares. Back in your village, the perfume artisans resume their craft with quiet devotion. Today, you sit beside a young woman stringing tiny beads onto a thin linen thread. But these aren't beads of carnelian or faience. They are delicate fragments of ostrich eggshell, smoothed into oval pendants and painted with faint blue lotus motifs. Historians still argue whether these miniature eggshell amulets served primarily as perfume carriers or protective charms. Mainstream evidence suggests both roles intertwined. They held scented pastes believed to attract divine favor while warding off evil spirits. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some amulets were painted with tiny eyes of Horus to watch the wearer's path, even as the perfume within masked any less than divine body odor. You watch her select a shard no bigger than your fingernail. With a bone awl, she pierces a neat hole near its top, then uses a reed brush to apply a swirl of deep indigo paint, outlining the elegant petals of a lotus blossom. She dips her brush again, adding a dot of gold powder suspended in castor oil at the center. The gold glints faintly under lamplight, a tiny sunrise captured on pale eggshell. Beside her sits a small clay jar of thick cinnamon lotus paste. She uses a slender bronze spatula to press a dab onto the inner curve of each eggshell pendant. The scent blooms warm and floral in the dim room, tinged with the earthy dryness of powdered shell. Carefully, she threads the finished amulet onto the linen cord, tying it in a tight knot before holding it up to admire. These perfume amulets will hang against the chests of young girls at festivals, their gentle scent mingling with laughter and the rattle of sistrum instruments. They will dangle from belts of noblewomen, swaying softly with each graceful step. And in moments of quiet prayer or private sorrow, a wearer might lift the pendant to her nose, inhaling the scent to feel close to Hathor, goddess of beauty, love, and sweet sleep. The sun dips low, casting copper light across the temple walls as shadows lengthen and cool evening breezes slip through reed screens. Tonight, you find yourself standing at the entrance of a long, quiet chamber lined with painted papyrus columns. It smells of cedarwood, frankincense, and something deeper, the unmistakable sweetness of perfume mixed with the resinous tang of embalming oils. Historians still argue whether ostrich eggshell perfumes were used primarily for elite mummifications or accessible in simpler burials as well. Mainstream evidence confirms even middle-ranking officials could afford small jars to scent their passage to the afterlife. Here's a quirky tidbit. One ancient embalming manual recommended mixing powdered ostrich eggshell with natron and honey to create a fragrant resin that repelled insects from burial wrappings. You watch two embalmers kneeling beside a linen-wrapped body. Their bronze scalpels lie beside small reed baskets filled with perfumed paste, eggshell fragments gleaming pale in the lamplight. One embalmer dips a spatula into blue lotus and cinnamon paste, scooping it gently and spreading it along the linen wrappings around the chest. The scent blooms warm and floral, tinged with faintly bitter resin. Nearby, a priest chants softly, shaking a sistrum so its bronze discs rattle like cicadas in summer reeds. The embalmers continue their work with rhythmic care. They press scented eggshell paste into small linen bundles, tucking these between the layers of bandages. Each placement carries prayer for safe passage, protection from desert demons, and to please Hathor, who welcomes souls with lotus-scented breath. One embalmer leans back to massage his aching shoulders. You notice his fingertips are dusted with chalky white from the eggshell powder mixed into the perfumes. He lifts them to his nose, inhales deeply, and closes his eyes with a small, tired smile. The scent is grounding, a reminder of earthly beauty even in this chamber of silent departure. As the embalming concludes, the room fills with gentle music and drifting perfume. In this stillness, it's easy to believe the soul rises peacefully, buoyed on scents carried from desert hunts, grinding stones, and quiet village workshops, a final fragrance guiding them beyond dawn's horizon. Morning comes again, cool and pale before the heat. You wander through the nearly empty perfume workshop, the scent of old resins and faded lotus petals lingering like quiet ghosts. Here, among empty grinding bowls and dusty reed baskets, you notice something different. Clay jars line one shelf, their glazes reflecting dim light in soft blues and greens, and beside them sit small glass bottles that gleam like frozen river water. Historians still argue whether glass perfume bottles appeared in Egypt by local invention or via imported techniques from Mesopotamia. Mainstream scholarship leans towards Mesopotamian influence around the late New Kingdom. Here's a quirky tidbit. Despite their beauty, many nobles still preferred ostrich eggshell containers for decades simply because they believed the egg's natural magic preserved scent better than glass ever could. You watch a perfumer decant thick lotus cinnamon paste from an old eggshell jar into a slender blue glass vial. The paste slides in with a slow, sticky sound, leaving behind faint white streaks clinging to the eggshell interior. The perfumer wipes his hands on a linen cloth and examines the eggshell jar, running his thumb along its chipped rim. He sighs, placing it aside in a pile of other used shells destined for disposal or grinding into pigment for temple wall paints. Nearby, a young apprentice holds up a tiny globular glass bottle, squinting at how sunlight catches the whorls and bubbles frozen in its ancient form. She dips a reed stick into it, brushes a dot of perfume behind her ear, and inhales with closed eyes, smiling at the scent, unchanged despite its new vessel. Gradually, glass and glazed pottery will replace ostrich eggs for perfumes. They are easier to seal, carry, and decorate with bright cobalt and copper hues. And so, the age-old tradition of eggshell perfumes will decline, leaving behind only temple murals, fragment amulets buried with the dead, and whispered stories passed down by perfumers who still remember the time when beauty was carried in something born of feathers, flight, and sun-bleached desert nests. Today, as you wander through a modern Egyptian market under a sky white with noon heat, you catch a familiar scent drifting from a small shop tucked between bustling stalls of dates, copper trays, and woven rugs. The sign above is simple, painted in faded Arabic script, and the window glows with rows of tiny glass vials. You step inside, and the cool shade wraps around you like quiet linen. Historians still argue whether any continuous perfume-making lineage survives from ancient times or if modern recipes are reconstructions. Mainstream scholars agree traditional perfumers in Egypt preserve older techniques blended with newer influences from Arabia, Persia, and France. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some rural towns, perfumers still hang small ostrich eggs above their stalls, not as containers, but as symbols of luck and enduring beauty. Behind the counter stands an elderly man in a white galabeah, his hands moving with practiced ease as he mixes oils from dark glass bottles into a shallow copper tray. The scent rises, thick, sweet, with a faint sharpness of cinnamon and resin. You watch as he sprinkles in fine white powder scooped from a small paper packet ground calcium. These days, instead of eggshell, though once they were the same. He notices you watching and smiles, gesturing to a shelf where two ostrich eggs sit side by side. Their surfaces are smooth, faintly dimpled with age, and one has delicate blue lotus flowers painted in curling strokes around its curve. "My grandfather used real eggshell for perfumes," he says softly. "Now they are too rare, but the blessings remain." You lift an egg gently in your palm, feeling its familiar weight, a quiet echo of temple workshops, desert hunts at dawn, and priests anointing gods with fragrant chalky pastes. The shop hums with fans whirring overhead and the distant murmur of market vendors calling out prices for apricots and fresh mint. The perfume maker caps your bottle with a brass stopper, and you leave into the bright afternoon, carrying with you the scent of cinnamon, blue lotus, and the lingering memory of ancient eggs that once held beauty and magic in their delicate shells. And now, as your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts drift soft and drowsy, imagine the quiet dusk settling across the Nile's wide, gentle waters. See the sun melt into glowing amber, its light rippling across reed beds where ibises tuck their heads beneath wings. Imagine your feet cool on smooth temple stones, the air heavy with the last warmth of day, and the scent of cinnamon and lotus rising around you in invisible, fragrant spirals. Picture an artisan brushing blue lotus petals into pale eggshell powder, mixing until the scent becomes soft, sweet, and grounding. Hear the scrape of pestles against basalt bowls, rhythmic and calming, echoing through quiet courtyards where oil lamps flicker with gentle golden flames. Feel the breeze curl around your shoulders, carrying the perfume's warm, earthy sweetness into the silent desert night. Let your breath slow with the hush of distant cicadas, your chest rising and falling like the Nile's quiet pulse. Let your mind soften into the shadows beyond temple columns where fragrant offerings burn, each curl of smoke lifting prayers towards silent stars. With every exhale, drift deeper into a quiet, restful darkness, held in a place where ancient perfumes linger forever, calming, grounding, and warm as sleep itself.